Profiles and Issues is a production of CTNY, the Catholic television network of Youngstown. It is a show that profiles people and issues that affect the church in the modern world. Your program host is Father James Korda.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Profiles and Issues. I'm Father Jim Korda. Our issue today is This Old Parish. To help me profile this issue is Father Jack Lavelle. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I think the first question that I'd like us to talk about is why has proper maintenance, and I'll use the word maintenance loosely, of our church buildings been both a problem and a necessity?
Well, if we want to look at the problem first, I think it just is the magnitude of most of our structures. I think when people look to take care of their own homes, they sometimes even see that as a monumental task. But it's much easier to do the maintenance on a home than it is to do on some of our church structures. And I think especially in the Catholic Church, for many of our campuses, if you will, we're not even talking about just one building. We're talking about, you've got to care for the church structure itself, the building where we gather on Sunday and for other liturgical events, but then you've got the rectory, the offices, sometimes school buildings, gymnasiums. It is such a vast structure, and I think as we get a little bit more into that topic, even just the design of them invites a whole different aspect of craftsmanship and areas that need to be looked at. But to jump to the other side, where I think it is such a necessity is, it is our gathering place. I've often said, ministry and liturgy needs a place from which to happen. The great call to our faith is to send people out, but we need to gather somewhere first to be instructed by word and sacrament. And so we need those structures to be able to gather for liturgy, for worship, for educational and social opportunities. So yes, it's a great challenge to maintain them, but it's so essential to how we live out our faith.
Let's try to differentiate between janitorial needs that have to be done and maintenance and just overall taking a look at the structures. Mm-hmm. What's the difference between janitorial services and day-to-day maintenance services?
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly I think in terms of those day-to-day maintenance, sometimes that can become a larger issue if not properly taken care of. I do think we have a responsibility either through parishes that have paid staff that fulfill those roles or volunteers to see to the day-to-day care of things. I think it's criminal to notice something that needs fixed and not fix it. So we can say in terms of janitorial, are the floors swept? Are the pews cleaned out? Are the cobwebs, gone? And then it moves into that larger, where we start to see, there's a little peeling of the paint here, the doors warped over here. Those issues, if not taken care of in a week-to-week observation, become a larger problem.
And isn't that the same, I think, in any structure that we experience, whether it's a church edifice or one's own home or building in a downtown metropolitan? If those things are not taken care of, not only is it a long-term maintenance issue, but it could be a structural issue as well.
Oh, absolutely. And when we look at our buildings, I really try to liken it to the new focus that's even going on in health of one's own body. Several years back, we started to hear the phrase preventative medicine or a wellness approach, and saw where it was far better to be constantly looking at one's health and making sure you were doing well, rather than waiting until you were so sick that maybe the recovery wasn't possible in the way it should be. And then also one of the factors is the financial aspect. It's far more expensive when one is sick than if they just continue to work at a wellness program. The same becomes true in our structures, whether they be church, whether they be public buildings, whether they be our own home. And it does kind of get out of control. But I think it starts with that day-to-day, that weekly, checking things, observing them before they get out of control.
I'm wondering if the folks that are with us might be saying to themselves, well, why do you want to put money into buildings? Why is it important to do that? Shouldn't we be, as a church, giving money to the poor? How do you respond to that?
You know, that's always something you hear. But again, I go back to that whole idea that, you know, all of those ministries need a place from which to happen. We come together to, again, be nourished, word and sacrament, to be able to recognize God's blessings in the community, and then really that challenge and charge of the community. I would say that I also work in Catholic Charities, and I would say that some of our best supportive parishes, in terms of their response, not only in financial gifts to things such as an appeal, but also just their physical contributions of things to, whether it's soup and crackers, whether it's school supplies, are coming from parishes that also have taken care of their structures. They really have it across the board. And I would say that they are people who have determined what their priorities need to be, and it's not just one aspect or another. Across the board, they have been good stewards. Stewards of the building, stewards of the liturgy, stewards of their educational and catechetical areas, and stewards of their charitable activity. So, yes, we could say, oh, why are we worrying about the buildings? But then if you don't have a place to gather people, you can't challenge them to do more.
And let's talk a little bit more about stewardship, because I think that really is an important issue when we're talking about our buildings and our resources. Why is it important when we talk about stewardship to look at the overall plan, not just one facet of it? You know, how important is that? That stewardship obviously is a way of life. So how do we incorporate the whole life of the parish in stewardship?
Well, again, I think it is key that we continue to educate people in stewardship. First and foremost, the stewardship of our faith, which then allows every other aspect of stewardship, you know, to flow. So first, that stewardship of this has been a gift that has been instilled in us from those who have come before us. And if we recognize ourselves more as stewards than owners, I think that really becomes the challenge. When we start to get into aspects that often do result in either our time, our talent, or our treasure, that old triple T that we often looked at in stewardship. You know, if we see ourselves merely as owners, we start to enter a problem. You know, well, you know, this is my money, so I don't need to, you know, give it to this or give it to that. But that sense of stewardship has us looking first and foremost at the past, into the present, and then well into the future. We look at our parish facilities. Very few parishes in our part of the country are new. It's different in the south and in the west, but you know, very few of our parishes are brand new. So very few of us were there at their founding. It is a gift that someone else has given us, either parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. They were good stewards of their faith and their resources and their talents, giving us the structures we have. And again, when we say structures, not just the physical structures of the parish, but those organizations, activities, all of that has been given to us, and we cannot be the generation that stops stewardship. You know, so we can't get caught up in that, well, I own this, or this is mine, or this is our group, or whatever it may be. We really need to invite that greater sense of we've been blessed with something, and we are just caretakers of it. And when you're a caretaker of something, you build it up. You don't tear it down.
How important is it, I think, for a parish to have a plan? How important is it to have a maintenance plan or a cleaning plan or just an overall renovation plan? Isn't planning a good idea?
Absolutely. And, you know, just to use a very isolated example, if you don't have some type of maintenance plan and are willing to look at everything. I'm involved in a parish that currently is doing a major renovation of its church structure, and then we're going to move into the offices and the residence and really see that this is the time and place for us to prepare for the future. But in one of the many facets of the renovation of the church, we found in our bell tower that there were exterior brick, but then there was an interior structure. Well, The movement of that bell over years, that vibration, started to weaken the mortar on the interior bricks. And by the time we went up, not only did we find that the wheel that operated the mechanism that was wooden was warped and cracked, but we found that 4 courses of that interior brick had already fallen in. Now, because there was no preventative maintenance or no plan to yearly look at this, we don't know what could have happened down the road. We caught it in time. So now, not only do we fix it, but then we say, now we have to enter into a maintenance plan. We find somebody who is versed in the care and maintenance of a bell tower. I'm not. No one in my parish is. But they will come yearly and monitor it, check it, make sure everything is working. And that's just so essential in every aspect. You have to have a plan, and you have to be willing to constantly revisit to make sure things are the way they need to be.
We're coming down to the last few minutes of our first segment. Let's talk briefly about building specialists. You had mentioned you're not a specialist in bell towers. Well, none of us are specialists in everything. So how important is it to get people who know actually what's going on? You're not going to get a plumber to fix an electrical problem. How important are specialists?
I think, again, it's essential. And I know we might have come out of an era of the church where many volunteers from the parish were able to come forth and offer their gifts and talents. And that still may be true to certain parts of our maintenance plan or our building plan, but there are just so many specialized areas now where people have studied, they have the experience, and again, I think gone are the days of just fix it all, that general person, the handyman who can just come in and do everything on a large scale. We now live in an era where people study. We have liturgical architects that know exactly how to do the design. They do a wonderful job of being able to help us blend old and new structures. The work of stained glass, that is a lost art in many cases. People say, oh, they don't build churches like they used to, but there are craftsmen out there who can blend that and bring that to us. So I think it's just essential to find the right people in every aspect, and then to have somebody who is very good at overseeing all of them. But even when you hire a general contractor to build your own home, one person does not come and build every aspect of that home. There are subcontractors in building the smallest of structures. You put up a garage, someone else comes and puts in the doors, someone else comes in and puts in the electric. And I think it's essential that we are aware of that and we seek out the best people possible in all of those areas.
We're going to take a quick break, but we're going to continue our discussion on this very important issue of this old parish. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Profiles and Issues. Our issue is this old parish, and with me is Father Jack Lavelle. We want to talk a little bit more about the money aspect of it all. Obviously, maintenance, janitorial services, specialists, planning, that all costs money. Where do parishes get money to do those things, especially parishes that may not be able to afford it? How can they plan in that regards?
Well, I do think even in an annual budget, when you're looking at staffing a parish, again, I think maintenance is just as important as all of the other aspects. And so I think we do need to, if at all possible, make sure that that's part of the budgeting process, that you have somebody on staff, just as you have a secretary who takes care of things in the offices, you have directors of religious education that help with the education of our children. I think it's essential to have the proper maintenance staff. Now again, as we said, it can be a financial issue. I know of many parishes who have one person who oversees and does most of the maintenance, but then because of financial constraints, they have really gone out to the people and said, there are some things though that we could get volunteers to do. Not a volunteer to come and start doing the electrical work or a volunteer to come and start doing the plumbing, but that maybe week in, week out maintenance. I was part of a parish that after we renovated, there was such a pride, a good pride in what had been accomplished, that 20-some women came together and said they were willing to volunteer every Friday to clean the church. We could never have afforded in our budget to pay people to clean the church as well as those 20-some ladies did, and they have never missed a week in 8 years. So I think it is being creative and tapping into the gifts and talents of people in the parish, but I also think you need to have somebody there that oversees it day in and day out.
You mentioned about volunteers who come. That's obviously been my experience too over the years in parishes, that you get a group of women that are retired or that belong to a ladies' guild organization that come in on one day a week to clean the church or clean the sanctuary. That's all fine. Mm-hmm. But what about the bigger jobs, the main buildings that really need professional people and specialists? You really can't rely on volunteers all the time to do that, because if that's the case, they don't do the job that you really need, especially when you're talking about structures. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think one of the problems, and this is not just in church structures, I think this is true of when you see anybody building something. I think we have a problem where we don't plan for the long term. We plan to come up with the resources to put the structure up, but we don't factor in what it's going to cost year in and year out to maintain that structure. So a perfect example is a parish that builds a new building, and this building now can have air conditioning. And it didn't have air conditioning in the past. And isn't this wonderful? And we can afford to do this. Well, did they factor in what their electric bill is going to be now having that air conditioning in this huge structure? And did they factor in that the day after you build it, it's a used building? There are things that go wrong with the newest of equipment. And so I think one of our problems is we've not done the proper budgeting when we erect these structures, that it's more than just getting it up. But what is the year in, year out maintenance, the plans, the allowing for every so many years something's going to go wrong that needs to be addressed?
I'm thinking of a structure like the bridge in San Francisco, the Golden Gate. They say, and I believe it's true, that once they finish painting, they start all over again, because it's an ongoing thing. And how important is that facet to understand that buildings and their maintenance is an ongoing? You really can't let one day go and say, oh, everything's perfect, because there's always something that needs to be done. It's true in our homes. It's true in any institution we go into. Those structures need day-to-day maintenance and upkeep. And so that plan, obviously, is extremely important. Let's talk a little bit about, there's a phrase that I've seen, especially when you're talking about stewardship, is blessings of giving. People who give, there's blessings. And I'm reminding of the scripture from the Acts of the Apostles, where we hear it during the Easter season, where the faithful gathered their treasures and gifts and laid them at the feet of the apostles, who used them for the greater good. Why and how have we lost that concept?
Well, and you're right. I think that's one of my most favorite phrases in Scripture. None of them were of need, because the community held everything in common. And I think we have moved out of that model. I don't know if it's part of our capitalist society where it was really, it's mine, and I will determine who else gets it? And we lost that sense, going back to stewardship, we lost that sense that everything we have is a gift from God. We have nothing without God. I think you see it in homes where, and I'm reminded of a more humorous story where a young child, remarked to his parents, well, we're rich. And the parents said, no, your mother and I are rich. You have nothing. And it, maybe reminds us that God has everything and He has blessed us with the opportunity to use these gifts and talents. But again, we're just stewards of them. And so we should be willing to offer them. But I do think maybe connecting it with our parishes and our structures, I have found incredible generosity from people. They really, once they understand that need, they do want to respond. Now, there may be other experts of stewardship out there that are going to say, well, you need to challenge people just to give to give. But I do think in our church structures, people like to give because of a way they've been touched, because of some tradition or culture in their family. And I think that there's nothing wrong with tapping into that when remodeling or building our structures. If someone's grandmother had a certain name and that's the name of a statue or a window, the saint in a window you're going to have, there's nothing wrong with tapping into that and then wanting to make a legacy gift of that and allowing others to pray before that image. I think if we present people with causes and it touches them in a profound way, they respond very generously. And I also think there's part of that human nature that when somebody sees someone else respond, they also are willing to respond. But I think however it happens, if we convey that to our people, without few exceptions, they respond very generously. But if we don't convey that message, the opposite is, you can turn around and within 10 years' time, people are like, I can't believe what's happened here. If you've not conveyed to them the need for their part and to continue to offer themselves time, talent, or treasure in the constant upkeep, the constant maintenance, very quickly we can turn around and say, what happened?
Well, the title of this issue is This Old Parish. Most of our parishes are old around the country, but there are many parishes that are new or that have built new within their structure. So how important is that to understand that new becomes old almost immediately? Mm-hmm. You use the word that it becomes used the next day. Mm-hmm. So how do we actually get that ingrained into our very mind that this is an ongoing necessity?
Well, I think first and foremost, we need to talk about it. I've heard pastors around the country as I've gone to different workshops or meetings say, well, I don't like to talk about money, or I don't like to talk about the physical. I like to just talk about the spiritual, and that's great, but that's not the reality. So not to badger people with it, but I think people need a healthy reminder. I think they need an honest reflection, pointing things out to them. I think people respond very well when we kind of come down from a higher sense and just talk about it in terms they understand. I think people respond very well when you say, for example, utility bills. When you stand up and are honest and say to people, you know what your utility bills are in your home. Imagine if your home was the size of this building. Our utility bills are 25 times what some of you may pay. And that takes resources, or what it costs when, there's some wind damage and you've had some siding blow off the side of your house. So I think sometimes we can't shy away from it and ignore it, because people are immediately going to say, well, you never told us there was a problem. And it's amazing how people can start to ignore the problems. I was involved in a renovation plan where we were debating about what type of chandeliers to put in. And the electrician was very honest with me and said, after the first few weeks, they're not going to look at those chandeliers again. They're just going to know there's light. Well, that got me to thinking, well, if they're not looking up at the new chandeliers, they're also not looking up at where the corners are all peeling, and they're not looking up at where there's water marks on the roof. And so they need reminders of some of those things, because before you know it, nobody knows why the roof caved in on us. So I think those reminders are important.
You use the phrase, and we're coming down to the last few minutes of our time together, leaving a legacy. And I know we use that often in terms of bequests or stewardship. What is this legacy that we have as the Catholic Church. And for better or worse, we are an institution. So what does our legacy say about our buildings?
Well, I think, again, it taps back into that. First and foremost, our legacy is our faith. But our faith needs to be cultivated. It needs to be developed. It needs to be challenged. And again, we need places to do that. A family that gathers for holidays. It might not matter what color the wall is painted. It might not matter what type of chair they're sitting on. But they need that space to gather in, to recall memories, to recall stories of the past, to recognize the blessing of new people in their family. They need a place to sit down and eat, and that's the reality of it. And the same is true in our family of faith. We need a place to gather and recall to memory those who have gone before us. We need a place to come together and recognize the new coming into our community that will be there when we're gone. And not to, lessen the great gift of the Eucharist, we need a place to eat. We need a place to come together, to be nourished by the Word, and to share in the sacrament of the Eucharist, but then to go out and share and build up the structures of faith and knowledge and wisdom and love and charity, but it needs a place to start.
Just one final comment, brief comment about stewardship and why it's important to tend our parishes and maintain our parishes.
Well, I think it is just so essential. That recognition, it's kind of recapping what we've talked about. First, that recognition of how God has blessed us. And that we hear that word steward in the very beginning of Scripture. The stewards of creation, recognizing that what God started from the very beginning was never ours to own, but it's ours to care for, to nurture, to build upon, and then to generously give to the next generation. And I think that's true of our faith. I think it's true of our buildings. And I think that is a lasting legacy. When people are able to come into a structure and feel at peace and at home with those who have gone before them, and to know that long after they're gone, this will still be a great institution. Institution gets a bad rap sometimes, but institutions are good. Those institutions and structures, when maintained and used for a good, positive purpose, are essential. And I think that's a great gift we in the Church have.
Father Jack Lavelle, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for being with us. Have a good day, and God be with you.
Profiles and Issues was a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. Your program host was Father James Korda.